Welcome to Discourse in Third Person, a podcast about video games, their narratives, and how they tell them. This is part 2 of our Heart of Darkness feature. If you haven't already, I invite you to listen to part 1, wherein we talk about Joseph Conrad's novella, Heart of Darkness, Francis Ford Coppola's adaptation and reinvention, Apocalypse Now, and the oppressiveness of Far Cry 2 in relation to both novella and movie. In this episode, we will talk about the 2012 video game Spec Ops The Line, which takes inspiration from the aforementioned novella and movie. Now, is it a more successful or faithful adaptation than Far Cry 2? Or does it merely use the framework to talk about something entirely like Far Cry 2? Well, dear listener, stick around and find out. Fair warning, however, here be spoilers.
So for Spec Ops The Line, it was made in 2012, right?
Right.
It follows Martin Walker and his entry into Dubai. And in this version of events, Dubai is on the Arabic side of Africa, has been engulfed by massive sandstorms of the like that we've never seen here on Earth.
Cataclysmic,
Yeah.
the scale of which just leveled the entire city, I believe.
Right, either buried or destroyed many parts of the city. So naturally, it became a conflict zone, and you, as Martin Walker, are sent to go in and do some reconnaissance on the edge of Dubai. As the game progresses, you keep pressing further and further into Dubai, really against orders, on the idea that you need to find John Conrad, which of course is a reference to Joseph Conrad, who Colonel John Conrad is a figure in Martin's past who saved his life.
Who he believes as a very good man, a very moral man.
And as you progress through the game, you progressively commit more and more atrocities, some of which,
are war crimes.
Actual war crimes, yeah.
Humanitarian disasters.
And you not only kill the residents of Dubai, but you also end up killing U.S. soldiers that have kind of gone rogue as well. And it's a pretty difficult game to swallow. Yeah, so Josh, what was your experience with this game?
So back in 2012 actually. It was a 360 age, right? And even back then I remember it was already getting a lot of praise from critics. And so I had to pick it up, and I went and bought the copy, played through it. And I'll be honest with you, I think I was in college when I played through it, I didn't quite grasp the importance of this game in terms of, I don't want to sound highfalutin here, but kind of elevating video games as a medium, as a narrative medium. I know it sounds very hyperbolic, but looking back at it, revisiting it for this episode, I really do appreciate it now.
I mean, not just from a narrative standpoint, which I think is an even better adaptation of Heart of Darkness than Far Cry 2, but a lot of the stylistic choices of cases where you're going through a metaphorical gate of hell and
right,
all these various stylistic choices that the developers and writers made were pretty amazing.
It does present very striking visuals from time to time, which I think we could dive into it a bit later. But so that's my experience. So I was part of the zeitgeist at that particular time. Again, I wasn't quite appreciative of it. I knew at the time that it was important. It wasn't until years later when I revisited it that I could appreciate it. But so that's my experience. Well, how about you, Jeffrey? What's your relationship with this game?
So I came to it looking to play it because I had heard about it. I had heard rave reviews, and I just kind of came into it knowing that it was a kind of difficult to stomach experience. And I gotta say, for a game that is 8 years old, it's really held up well.
And to piggyback what you said, if you look at the, if you probably just look at screenshots and probably even look at the cover, it does look generic,
Hmm.
but it is something that you have to experience. Because I'm inclined to agree that of the haunting visuals, the art direction, the entire city,
Hmm.
Dubai, right?
Yeah,
Dubai is such a, what was it? Such a rich place.
incredibly.
It is a mark of decadence. It's like opulence, skyscrapers, and then to see such splendor, such grandeur just buried in sand. So, okay, so you're talking about these visuals, and I mentioned haunting visuals, but
Mm.
what are some of these visuals you keep referencing, Jeffrey? I mean, I mentioned the skyscrapers, I mentioned
Hmm.
opulence, but what are you referring?
Right. I think all of us or everyone that played this game kind of references a moment, and probably it's probably one of the most pivotal moment of the game where the player has to get through a very heavily armed area of the game.
Are we going to talk about that scene?
Yeah.
This is pretty much any conversation about Spec Ops The Line will entail this particular scene.
And it gets pretty graphic. So for a certain portion of the game, there's a very heavily armed section of that you have to get through to get to what was referenced previously as the gates. You have to go through the gates, and in order to go through the gates, you have to basically kill your way through a large group of rogue soldiers, rogue US soldiers, and the squadron, including Captain Martin,
Walker, Adams, and Lugo.
right? While observing this large group of soldiers, it's just too many to fight, with regular conventional weapons. They find a mortar with white phosphorus shells.
Old Willie Pete.
And for those of you that don't know what white phosphorus does, it can be used as a smoke screen. But if the white phosphorus hits flesh, it also pretty much horribly and fatally burns its victims. And thus, you use the white phosphorus on these soldiers, which again is a war crime. But not only that, and this is the choice by the developers that you're viewing it through a black and white like overhead screen. So you're just seeing basically it looks like heat signatures,
Right, right.
bodies running through an area that you have to eliminate.
And so, as I recall it, prior to this scene,
Hmm.
Adams, who mentioned the use of white phosphorus, and Lugo is the person who sort of resists. But what did Walker say about the use of white phosphorus?
Something to the effect of it's the only way
It's
for.
the only way. There's no choice. We had to do it. This is it.
Yeah,
Right. And so they do use the white phosphorus. And you're describing the interface, right? After Adams sets it up, and of course, Adams gives the player to Walker, and by extension,
the player character.
player. And I think the interface you're talking about is this screen, right? This
Yeah,
screen wherein you have an overhead shot and you could see heat signatures,
right.
and so you see pretty much dots and you have a crosshair and you, in some senses, have you played Call of Duty? Do you remember playing Call of Duty?
Depends on the iteration.
I think all of them have some, when you take control of an UAV, or when
Yeah,
you're it's very detached, right? You just kind of, it is an actual crosshair and you just see your little ants just crawling around.
right.
But I think you're mentioning it. What did the developers do to kind of, I wouldn't say highlight it, but kind of undercut that distance, that disconnect?
Right. So after you use white phosphorus on these soldiers and basically eliminate all these white dots on the screen, you end up walking through the
Right.
the aftermath, which I think it's used in narratives in war video games, first person shooters. I've never seen it used this effectively. And then
Yeah, the fact that you visit your aftermath, and I think even prior to this, you had a similar scene wherein you walk through the effect of a white phosphorus. Although this one you did not, you didn't do it. You didn't do the white phosphorus.
right, you didn't
Right.
perpetrate it.
You didn't perpetrate the previous one, but So you had an idea. You as a player had an idea of what the effect of white phosphorus did.
And at the end of the section,
Oh yeah.
you find that they were actually sheltering a bunch of civilians, and large grouping of the white dots were civilians, of which a close-up shot of like a mother holding her child, their flesh burned off
The
their
face
bones.
half charred,
Yeah,
flesh sloughing off the bone. So that's a particularly haunting visual.
yeah,
So even prior to you strolling through even before you find out the civilians, there was one survivor, one rogue soldier survivor.
yeah,
What was it that he said? It was something like we were only trying to help.
yeah.
Then that's the reveal of the civilians. So with the white phosphorus event,
Yeah.
Jeffrey, in some cases people would say that's the line. Do you think that's the eponymous line?
For me, I felt it beforehand.
Okay.
I felt it when earlier in the game, there's some rogue US soldiers running in front of you, and then you have to fight them. And I wanted to see if there was a way not to fight them, and there just isn't. They open fire on you, so you have to fire back in order to continue the game.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That was kind of a point where as a player, I was very unsettled doing it at first. And then it became, I guess, routine. And that was kind of scary.
Became desensitized to it, or
Yeah.
not so much desensitized, but I think it also speaks to the one recurring
Hmm.
theme of it, and that's of choice or the lack of it. The people are pushed to extremes because of the circumstances that they're given,
Hmm.
or at least they're presented. Funny how you said that's the line for you.
How about you?
I mean, I'll be honest with you, when I first played it, I think this has something to do with the fact that I was entrenched in the shooter genre, video games during that time, and I think it owed to, I don't know, I guess the Call of Duties of the world. It was fresh in our memories, Call of Duty Black Ops during that time because it was 2012, right?
Yeah.
And so I didn't actually realize the nuances of that. I just thought, hey, they're soldiers, they're shooting at me. I'm gonna shoot
Hmm.
them. With me revisiting it 8 years, I played it again this year. Yeah, I think I had the same reaction you did when I'm shooting American soldiers. Is this
Yeah.
am I a war criminal now?
I find it interesting that I didn't feel that way about the CIA.
Okay. Okay.
I'm not sure about what that says about, but
Okay. Since we're talking about CI, let's go back a bit and let's go over a broader overview of what happened, right? So the whole point of the video game is about there is that line and you always have to cross that line, or at least just towing that line. So in the beginning, you have Walker, Adams, Lugo. And what were their orders to begin with? What was their impetus for being there? Why were they there?
right, it was to probe the edge.
Right.
Was it try to make contact and
No, it was just recon. They were just there.
recon? Yeah.
Their whole entire operation was supposed to be reconnaissance. That's all they were there to do,
Hmm.
right?
And there's like something about the sandstorms blocking transmissions.
So I guess we need to go even further than that. Okay, here's the point that I wanted to make now. I think this game is about intentions. Even though you may have the best intentions, circumstances will force you into making worse decisions. Case in point, as part of the backstory,
Hmm.
I think John Conrad was leading his battalion, and I think he volunteered the damn 33rd
Hmm.
for evacuation efforts, for relief. That's what they're there to do.
Hmm.
But the reality of the situation is John Conrad and his battalion was just overwhelmed by the reality. And so there was a coup d'etat.
Hmm.
That's actually the rogue faction that you're fighting is the splinter from the battalion. So their intention, Joseph Conrad's intention was to help out Dubai.
Yeah.
But what happened? He had to put martial law, he had to clamp down. One thing led to another, and you suddenly have a faction that disagreed, coup d'etat, and enact even further atrocities.
Hmm.
And I think that's when the CIA came in, right?
And throughout the course of the game, it eventually becomes clear that the CIA isn't there to help the residents. They're not even there to help the soldiers. They're there to make sure that the failures of the American effort there are not found out by the rest of the world.
Right.
By killing everybody, pretty much destroying the only sources of water and letting everyone die of thirst in the city.
So it is a case of, again, just extreme circumstances bringing out extreme decisions out of people.
If I could kind of relate it back to Heart of Darkness,
Sure.
and I alluded to this before, where Heart of Darkness, when I did more research about colonialism in that era and right before that era, you're talking about a humanitarian disaster that spanned the globe. 12 million people died in the Congo from the Belgian brutality. And that's the estimate, at least.
Sure.
So I think if you kind of view Kurtz, everyone in the old world, everyone in Europe, kind of extols that Kurtz is such a magnificent individual. And they even explicitly say that you're going into the region to try to bring civilization. But when you really get down to it, like, Kurtz was a frail and brutal man that eventually was just there for his own self-interest in, making money. And their intentions, whether or not they were actually just rationalization or whether it was their intention, they did none of those things that brought peace and civilization to the area.
So let me get this straight. You're making a parallel between Kurtz and Conrad. Kurtz from Heart of Darkness and Conrad in Spec Ops, or?
Well, I'm saying that Kurtz himself is kind of a symbol of colonialism. And just as I think Martin Walker is, or the game in general, is a allegory for perhaps American imperialism in the Middle East.
Sure. Okay, I have a question about that, though, Jeffrey.
Yeah, go ahead.
But the presence of the damn 33rd in Dubai was completely supposed to be, in the beginning, not exploitative, but again, was supposed to be altruistic. They weren't there to exploit Dubai. I mean,
Right.
In fact, they were there to try and save it.
Right. And here's where it may be reading too much into the material itself, but I mean, you look at the current counterparts, right, of American intervention in the Middle East, and those have been, in a lot of ways, disasters.
Right.
Let's kind of put into place our expectations at the time, right, when we went to, let's say, Iraq.
You're talking about post-war, the government set up after the initial entry into the Middle East.
Even our intentions going into Iraq in 2000.
Okay.
Let's start there, where
Sure.
Saddam Hussein was a brutal dictator who committed genocide, absolutely. But we had this vision of a free and democratic Iraq that, unfortunately, as we found out later, was not a reality, because you had these various sects of Islam.
Sure.
As well as the realities of fighting terrorism.
Right.
I mean, civilians are going to get caught in the crossfire.
Complete misunderstanding of the local culture and just the way of life, as it were.
Right. I mean, there was a vision of what we thought would happen, kind of like the vision of, oh, we went into France and we were greeted as liberators.
I kind of see what you're saying. But I don't know, in some ways, it's kind of difficult.
Go ahead.
I could see the idea that there's a sense of the American exceptionalism, wherein you go into a country and be treated as liberators. There is that intent once again, right? There's, for better or worse, boorish as it is, you go into a country and you think, oh, we're gonna help out. That is the intent, right? Or pretense, what have you. But in Spec Ops The Line, though, again, I'm going to go back to it. The intention was to help out. Was it just underestimating either the threat, which could stand in for the underestimating or mishandling the local political climate, or is it overestimating the abilities of the army itself? I don't know.
I think it's both.
You think it's both? I guess I'm just having a hard time
connecting those two themes.
connecting those two things. Particularly the point is altruistic part. I mean, eventually they messed it up. They made things worse.
Yeah. Well, I think it's one of those things where, whereas Heart of Darkness was a light version of the atrocities committed in colonialism, maybe Spec Ops The Line is actually a harder version of, or even harsher critique of what perhaps actually is the reality in these countries. We come to part 2, guilt and psychological horror.
I'm gonna harken back to something we talked about earlier about there's a dichotomy in reading of Heart of Darkness. You can read it as the colonial aspect, and the other one is the psychological aspect. Now I want to talk about the psychological horror present in Spec Ops The Line. Heart of Darkness, the thing that drew me into it was, of course, the exploration of change, of your surroundings changing you, the change being on the inside rather than the outside. You delve pretty deep into the psyche of Martin Walker.
Yeah.
At times, it is straight up horror, especially with some of the visuals that you experience.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about, I guess, the setting itself. Dubai as a reflection of Martin Walker.
Right.
Much like in Heart of Darkness, the surroundings influenced Kurtz and Marlowe. So the visuals of Dubai. Going back to it, you're right. I'm kind of hard pressed to think of something such as this, wherein you explore a devastated city with sandstorms. I mean, separately, you've explored devastated cities, you've explored desert areas, but you know what? I've never actually seen the two of them together.
Even in terms of gameplay, the sand is a element in the game.
Yeah.
But it did capture the feeling that the city was being smothered. And you really did feel that, all right, we have to leave. The city was dying.
The city was dying. And how the environment and the surroundings and the setting is incorporated into Martin's descent into madness, or into the Heart of Darkness. Did you notice you always go down? You're always descending. Martin Walker's, he always ends up lower than where he started. There's a descent. There's a verticality in the traversal. That's, as you experience Martin Walker's descent, you're also, as a player, descending into this husk, this burnt out ruin. Well, not burnt out, I guess just desiccated, I guess would be.
Yeah, desiccated
would be a better term for it. So, psychological aspect. I think where it really ramps up, or at least the line in terms of that, going back to the white phosphorus incident. I think that's the first instance. I think after that scene is the first instance where you get a call from Conrad. That's the first time you get into contact with Conrad.
And then that's where there's a shift where Conrad becomes the antagonist for the player.
And the antagonist for the player. And the character is introduced after that time. And speaking back on the white phosphorus, and I think that point is the line, because at that point, Martin, Lugo, and Adams, at that point, once they've done the white phosphorus, I mean, shooting rogue American soldiers, you could still, I mean, you're probably going to get court-martialed for that. There's going to be an inquest, but if they fired on you, I mean, that's still kind of justifiable, right?
Yeah.
But at the point where you use white phosphorus to kill civilians, I mean, Lugo himself says he made us killers. And I think that's really the point of no return.
Walker has to basically rationalize it for himself, saying, no, it was Conrad that made us kill.
Right. His mind has to concoct this justification, because he has to be forced to do it, right?
Right.
It has to be an external force. And so you see, this game does escalate things. You think white phosphorus would be the worst of it. I mean, you pretty much made sure that everyone in the city is going to die because of the water.
Yeah, you essentially steal tankers of water, and the CIA operative basically says, yeah, we're going to take this water and we're going to something like distribute it to the people or something like that.
And really, the only choice you have is whether or not you mercy kill the CIA operative. That's the choice you get. Not, well, I don't want to mess with the water. It's, do I want to put him out of his misery or not?
Well, I mean, the CIA operatives, that was the goal of the CIA operative, was to destroy the water
Yeah.
so that the war crimes of the US don't
Right.
get revealed.
Right. So we keep talking about psychological horror. We keep referencing psychological horror. And what exactly is the psychological horror aspect of it? You know, Martin gets visions, right?
Hmm.
He gets visions of this tall gate, or is it building?
Yeah, it's like two buildings that kind of look like gates.
It's very stark. It's like blood red. The sky is blood red.
Yeah,
I think more than once you cut to it.
yeah.
And so, aside from just being a striking image, what do you make of that? What's your interpretation of that?
I think, I mean, obviously, just a metaphor of the character going through the gates of hell and that there is no return. I mean, I think the point of no return was, immediately earlier where you kill the civilians, but yeah, it is metaphorical for the character's journey.
Okay, yeah, it's like a literal hell. Aside from that, there's also the media and media res. We actually neglected to mention this, but the game opens up with a helicopter scene.
Right.
And a very odd opening scene because you don't have any context.
You're just thinking, oh, it's American choppers.
It definitely is a reference to,
Apocalypse Now.
was it Apocalypse Now? Because there was okay, the language of that scene does reference those kinds of movies, like the action film.
Or even more recently, Black Hawk Down, right?
Yeah. And it would you say it was kind of a fake out to kind of lull you into a sense of, yeah, no, this is your typical generic action shooter.
I think everything leading up through the point of using white phosphorus, use that language, use that very patriotic message that we're coming to help.
Or coming to help. Up until, well, up until you shoot American soldiers. I think you kill more Americans
Than anyone else.
than foreigners, really, yeah.
It's kind of revealed that the foreigners are just kind of desperate
When we say foreigners, we say locals. I think locals would be
citizens of Dubai.
the desperate citizens of Dubai. The helicopter scene again
Yeah, go ahead.
gets revisited. You actually get to play the helicopter scene again.
Hmm.
But now you get proper context.
Right. Those are other Americans you're shooting.
Your other Americans are shooting. But one thing actually still kind of stuck to me, like even before revisiting it, when you play the helicopter section again, Martin actually calls out the fact that, didn't we do this again? Didn't this happen already?
Yeah.
So it might seem minor. It's a bit subtle, right?
Yeah, I noticed it, and I guess it didn't really hit home for me. So what did the numbers mean?
So what does the numbers mean, Mason? So one thing, obviously, I mean, you could say it's the fracturing psyche of Martin Walker, where he's just forced to relive something again, or at least he's inflicted with the suffering of having to repeat something once.
His own personal hell.
His own personal hell. And you know what? The fact that they repeat it, right? Well, it's weird. Again, it's minor, right? It's a very minor thing, but it still held on to me because that sense of deja vu that he has to repeat it over and over again. The helicopter scene is one of many scenes that he has to repeat as punishment, as a premonition. I don't know. That sense of doubt. This game really did not pull any punches, did it?
It was pretty haunting in a lot of ways. As I said, psychological horror usually doesn't work well for me for various reasons, but some of the aspects, the visuals aspects of this game, and just again the white phosphorus scene.
The white phosphorus. It always comes back to white phosphorus. We should probably address the largest part of the psychological horror, the reveal.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so ultimately, we do find out that Conrad is a figment of Walker's imagination. We alluded to it that he was used as a sort of justification for atrocities he felt he had to commit. That reveal kind of puts things into a different.
Right.
There is no external force. It's you. You feel like a hero yet? I think is one of the lines
From the loading screen.
from the loadings. There's a lot of details about this game that really just stand out. Anyway, so the reveal. Conrad's dead. It was just Martin Walker all the time. How did you feel about that reveal?
Right. So, say the three choices that I put in front of you after that, right? At that moment, you have a figment of your imagination, John Conrad, come up and says, either shoot yourself or shoot me, or I'll shoot you after 5 seconds or so.
Right, that's how they incorporated multiple endings. Well, you get to choose your ending.
In terms of like Conrad being a figment, I felt like it was a little bit too much of a little too M. Night Shyamalan-y.
Really? Huh. Okay.
I mean, that's just my personal thought. And to be fair, I didn't experience that in the game. I found out about it beforehand.
Sure.
So it didn't really have the impact, obviously, when I got to the end actually playing the game. I thought it was all right.
Okay. I mean, the idea that as a trope that it was all in his head all along is present. We've had that several times in pop culture.
But I mean, obviously, it was set up beforehand. You were getting all these visual aberrations and hallucinations. So, I mean, in that sense, it was something that the fit from a narrative standpoint. But what about you? What do you think about
The reveal itself.
the reveal itself?
Okay, so one thing that psychological horrors games tend to use is the idea of guilt. Just guilt. Thematically, I think guilt is used often. For example, the Silent Hill series. That's pretty much when someone thinks of psychological horror, someone thinks of Silent Hill. But anyway, guilt. So as a reveal that it was just a figment of his imagination, as a twist, I felt it was good. Puts into question what happened prior to that, but it also ties back to that psychological horror aspect that the guilt that Walker feels is so strong that his mind broke, that he had to come up with an antagonist
Mm-hmm.
to justify his guilt. In some ways, he needed someone to punish him. Does that make sense?
Right.
He can't admit his guilt. He has to have someone admit his guilt for him,
Yeah.
for better or worse. So I liked it. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it primarily for that fact. Again, I'm reading Spec Ops The Line as more of a horror than it is a shooter. It is 100% a shooter, but the horror aspect, I feel, elevates it.
It's not about collecting seashells and turnips and getting into debt to raccoons.
I was going to ask, this is an Animal Crossing reference.
It's an Animal Crossing reference, yes.
All right, so that's how I feel about the reveal. Let's talk about the endings and how it's presented, which, by the way, is a masterclass in integrating gameplay and the narrative, wherein you get to choose what ending you want.
It's pretty interesting. I think all the endings except for one are pretty good. Are like great endings to from a narrative standpoint of the character.
So let's go over the 4 endings, right?
Okay, yeah, go
All
ahead.
right, so the 4 endings is Walker could shoot himself
Yep.
or allow Conrad to shoot him. After that, apparently, what happens is Walker and Conrad, so you see their corpses just together. And Conrad's original broadcast just plays.
Right.
Okay. You could, Walker shoots Conrad.
Shoot Conrad, which opens up 2 additional endings.
There's an epilogue. And even further, the epilogue, you do have choices there.
There's soldiers that eventually come and pick you up. And if you're picked up by them, there's kind of a dialogue where how many other survivors are there who said he was survivors?
Yeah.
I think this is the weakest of the.
Yeah, you think so? You think so?
Yeah.
We'll talk about it in a bit. How about that? And then the other one is apparently you could get killed by the patrol, or the Walker kills the entire patrol. So those are all the endings. I'll be honest, I don't remember the ending that I got. I think I got the one that you hated, your disliked one.
So you shot Conrad, and then you went quietly.
Yeah, went quietly. So let's talk about it. So why don't you like it, Jeffrey?
Let me back up and just say I shot Conrad because you committed war crimes.
That's fair. So you got the patrol as well.
Just to be clear, discourse in third person is advocating for war criminals.
Are advocating for, you should probably finish your sentence, Jeffrey.
War criminals to kill themselves.
Okay, there you go.
Just to be clear about what we're advocating.
I think the phrasing of that a bit disclaimer could be worked on a bit.
My phrasing was a psychological horror.
You're destined to repeat your actions over and over again.
Welcome to Dubai.
Welcome to Dubai. Anyway, so you shot Conrad.
Yeah, I had Conrad kill himself.
Oh, you mean Walker kills himself? You killed yourself.
Yeah, I killed
You
myself. I'm
said you
sorry.
said you shot Conrad. Okay.
My bad. I had Walker shoot himself.
Okay, that's fair.
I just couldn't get over the things that Walker had done throughout the game.
If you take my reading of Conrad as guilt, a manifestation of Walker's guilt, would that be in line of sort of a redemption? Like he admits his guilt, and so
I mean, it's an admission of guilt. It's not a redemption of,
right,
but it's an admission of guilt.
at the very least.
And why killing Conrad is the weakest and going peacefully?
Sure.
It's because you're not really admitting the guilt, or it kind of does try to admit it, but I don't think it does a very good job of admitting the guilt that you had in terms of committing these atrocities. And that's why, I think the other endings are better, is because you either kill yourself, admitting the guilt, or you go the other route and the patrol comes to pick you up and you just start killing them. You either die or you kill them all. In that branch, you accept that you are the monster. That is who you are. You're the Kurtz of the story, and this is your realm now.
Welcome to Dubai, as he says.
Right. If he kills the entire patrol, he picks up the radio and says,
"Gentlemen, welcome to Dubai."
Those two endings were way better than just going peacefully.
So, if I may.
Go ahead.
This is an interpretation of that. So Conrad is a construct of Walker.
Yeah.
And I guess the game is also pointing to the fact that even prior to the white phosphorus war crime, Martin Walker already has this idealized construct of Conrad. The reason why he keeps pushing forward, even though his entire mission was just to be reconnaissance, is that it's what Conrad would do. He idealized Conrad as this moral person just because he saved him in Afghanistan. Post-White Phosphorus Conrad is a construct of Martin Walker. What is it a construct of? We mentioned guilt. Okay.
Yeah.
For the sins that he himself cannot admit. If he shoots Conrad, which by this point is everything that he says is external force, right?
Mm-hmm.
But since him shooting Conrad would be he denounces his vision, his idea of Conrad. And if he shoots Conrad, who's the only one left? Himself.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I interpret him shooting Conrad is him admitting to himself that he has to live with the sins of the atrocities that he's committed. Whereas your interpretation of him shooting himself, Walker shooting himself, is that admission of guilt.
Yeah.
I would say that him shooting Conrad is him destroying the construct, this idealized construct, and him actually facing reality. Because he's not using Conrad as sort of like a vessel for all his sins and his guilt, and he has to carry that himself. What does Conrad say at the end? What was it? If Walker instead shoots Conrad, he disappears after telling Walker that he can still return home.
And finally, closing thoughts.
I think you could write about Spec Ops The Line and its portrayal of choices, making hard choices in extreme circumstances, of best intentions leading to, again, said extreme decisions.
I thought what was interesting was there was a one-up piece with an interview with one of the writers of the game, and they mentioned how they did consider a point pretty early on. It sounded like in the game where you could turn back and basically fulfill your mission. All right, I did the reconnaissance. This is what I found. It's time to leave and go back through the desert. Okay, so this was a cut piece of content because their philosophy of it was you could at any time put the game down and not commit further atrocities. The line for you as the player is wherever the line is for
you as a player.
Yeah, for you as a player and for Walker by extension.
I remember Spec Ops The Line was a hot topic of discussion precisely because of that, because of the omission of that particular choice.
Yeah,
In that some would say one criticism was that you were kind of forced into.
continuing
There's no.
agency or what have you.
And I remember it being a hot button issue way back when this thing came out. Do you agree or disagree with that?
I think they had a very intentional idea in mind. And so I think, in terms of what they wanted to accomplish in terms of narrative and a modern retake on Heart of Darkness, they really achieved it. Would it have hurt the game if they included that option? I don't think so. I don't think it was a major issue. And they did a very good job with it. So
They wanted to tell that particular story, and I mean, you have to make concessions where you can. And if that's the kind of story that game designers, game developers want to tell, I mean, that's the kind of story they have to tell. So, Spec Ops The Line.
as far as closing thoughts, Josh, does it surprise you that Spec Ops: The Line was banned in the United Arab Emirates?
Really? I did not know that. Why did they ban it?
Because Dubai was brutally savaged and
Oh, that's right. Okay, the depiction, they didn't like the depiction of the city
in ruin
in
and
ruin. Okay, I could see it.
atrocities committed on its
On its
people.
people. I mean, okay, I get it. I get why. Okay. That's pretty funny. It's not the atrocities part, but I mean,
Spec Ops: The Line currently not rated by the UAE ratings agency for video games.
you know what? They're missing out on a cultural milestone.
Yeah, closing thoughts on Heart of Darkness, Far Cry 2, or Spec Ops: The Line.
So as far as closing thoughts, I mean, it's interesting how Heart of Darkness has inspired, the movie Apocalypse Now, and in so doing, the Apocalypse Now itself inspires a lot more people. As far as video games go, inspired by Heart of Darkness, it's interesting what aspects of Heart of Darkness and Apocalypse Now that they choose to turn into a video game. As a medium, video games have completely different priorities
Right.
and avenues to incite a specific emotional response as an art form.
Yeah.
And there's some things you can't quite turn into a game. It's kind of difficult to turn into a game. More sensitive aspects of history, I think, is a bit difficult to do so. But as far as video game adaptations go, I like to emphasize the aspect of Heart of Darkness that delves into the mind, how things change, how people could become quote unquote enlightened or changed by their experiences and become something completely different, their outviews and outlook. People going through hell, and through that hell, you become different. You become a different person.
All right.
Well, how about you, Jeffrey?
I'd say I do see that Far Cry 2 is a decent adaptation, but I think Spec Ops: The Line is a more close to spirit of what Heart of Darkness was.
I happen to agree with you on that front. Yeah, no, I agree with you because in Far Cry 2, again, I think a lot of it is more of an evocation, really,
Yeah.
than which is not a bad thing. Don't get me wrong. It's not necessarily a good or a bad thing whether or not how close you are. I think as an adaptation, but if we're looking at it through that criteria, I would happen to agree with you. Yes.
Right, certainly. And I think, again, the broader themes of colonialism and imperialism does really call into question those policies, past and present. And it really grabbed me and made me kind of consider how these policies and these actions fit into my worldview. So that may not have been the intent of either material, neither Heart of Darkness nor Spec Ops: The Line. In fact, the writer even said that it was not meant as a repudiation or narrative on American imperialism in the Middle East, but sometimes things speak to the reader in ways that the author doesn't intend, and that's not invalid, I feel.
Any good art form, isn't it? Makes you introspective, makes you reflect, makes you think. And you know what? This is what this is all about. Although I liked Far Cry 2, I like the tech demo, the simulationist aspect of it. I'm going to refer back to what I said, the hyperbolic statement that I said that the Spec Ops The Line elevates video game narratives. Because it did. It does. And it makes you think. That's what art does. Makes you question, makes you uncomfortable.
Well, that's our show. Thank you for listening. We'll be back next month with more on narratives in video games.